why are we here? Well, in my case, and I'm pretty certain in virtually everybody else's case, it's because we are gravely concerned about the future of our country. And my friend Ann Corcoran, who I've known for many years, says it succinctly and puts the exact right point on it. This is the turnkey issue for our country right now. We have to stop this. We have to. Because the agenda behind refugee resettlement, as is the agenda behind the entire immigration program, is to swamp our nation with populations of people who do not understand, appreciate, or wish to assimilate into our country as productive members of our society as Americans. They come here to take advantage of the welfare. Some certainly come for work, but they do not come here to become part of the American society, American culture, American dream. By the time they get done, we will be inundated with so many different people that we will cease to exist as a nation with a national identity. All of the things that define us, that make this an exceptional nation, will vanish. And that's their goal. That is the goal. Because that American exceptionalism, our Constitution, our way of life, our free market capitalist economy, is what makes us strong. It's what makes us different. It is what has for 200 years protected us from our enemies, and we have a lot of them. So this is a critical issue. Now, I'm just going to start with a few scary slides right from the beginning. This is a timeline that I created based on Heritage Foundation definitions of terror plots, and they get their information directly from the FBI, which is very, very conservative. They hate to talk about Islamic terrorism, as you know. They don't like to even talk about it as it exists. But, so they take their time. So, for example, that 7/18, oh wait a minute, where is it? 7/16 of 2015, that was the Chattanooga, Tennessee attack on the recruiting station where 5 servicemen were killed. Took them almost half a year to define that as a terrorist attack. You know, so much of this we hear about workplace violence. Well, so the FBI is very conservative, and this is about 74 terror plots, many of which have been intercepted before they start. The red ones have not, and if you notice, the volume and number of successful attacks is increasing and has been increasing over the years. The director of the Defense Intelligence Agency says an ISIS terrorist attack in the United States this year is very likely. He said that. He said it in congressional testimony. He also said that ISIS, that refugees from Syria cannot be vetted. The head of the FBI, James Comey, said that Syrians cannot be vetted. The director of counterterrorism for the FBI said refugees from Syria cannot be vetted. The director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said that the worries of ISIS coming in through the refugee stream to the United States are a, quote, huge concern. Even Jay Johnson, who is the director of Homeland Security and the person who is largely responsible for ordering border agents to stand down and open the borders to all comers, said, Syrians, we don't really know who they are. And there's really no way to know who they are because the vetting process relies on a series of databases. And as James Comey said, if you don't have a database, you can query them till the cows come home, and you will never figure out who these people are. So we have this administration that speaks out of both sides of its mouth. That sounds pretty familiar, actually. The other side is the refugee resettlement infrastructure. The State Department, the Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, and Department of Homeland Security, all are promoting refugee resettlement, along with a massive array of private contractors, U.S. government contractors, that make about $2 billion a year resettling refugees, all say, oh, Syrians can easily be vetted. We have the best vetting program available. Who do you believe? People who are making money on it, or the people whose job it is to protect our nation? And I will say, you know, we give the FBI a lot of grief for being politically correct and being very careful with the words they use, but I have to tell you, they have done an astounding job of preventing attacks in this country so far, and they really should be given credit for that, because they are inundated. There's over 900 active, ongoing ISIS investigations in all 50 states right now. There have been over 80 ISIS arrests so far, with 28 convictions. There are ISIS training camps south of the border, and drug smugglers are ferreting them into the United States over the border so they can survey potential targets and then taking them back. That's going on right now. And don't anybody ever let you say, tell you that refugees have not committed any terrorism. There are a lot of refugees who have committed acts of terrorism, and we really actually don't even know, because the administration will not tell us who is of the recent immigrants involved in terror plots. They won't give us their immigration status. Senator Sessions tried to get that from them last year, and they wouldn't divulge it, although he identified 72 different cases of terrorist plots in 2015 alone. They would not tell him the immigration status of the people who were arrested in those plots. So you just make up your mind yourself. This guy urged the Garland, Texas terrorists to attack that art show. He was also involved with the San Bernardino terrorist attacks, and he has been connected to 16 other Americans and 12 others plotting jihad. He was in Minnesota, he returned to Somalia, and he became an online recruiter, one of their most effective ones, for terrorists. So don't let anybody tell you they don't commit terrorism. Here's the latest. This guy was arrested, or this guy was found a week ago as a security guard at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. He's accused of torture and mass murder in Somalia during the Somalian Civil War. We have a really good vetting program, folks. Here's where the ISIS arrests have occurred so far. This was as of February. 2 of them in Michigan, a lot, of course, in Minnesota. There's a very strong Somali population, a lot of whom get involved in terrorist attacks, many of whom go back to the Middle East to engage in jihad or attempt to. So that's just sort of a snapshot of where we are in terms of our national security threat. Needless to say, it's very serious. Something we all need to worry about. But the resettlement agenda is so much bigger than that. That's only the part that really gets our attention because, you know, we're worried for our lives. But this is just as dangerous. The modern refugee resettlement agenda was created at the 1976 Conference on Human Settlements put out by the UN in Vancouver, Canada. They didn't talk about refugees as needy populations requiring saving from the oppressors of the world. They talked about how refugee resettlement could be used as an agenda to achieve social justice, as a means to not merely redistribute income as we characteristically think of Marxism, but to redistribute land, resources, and populations throughout the world. This is a socialist agenda, folks. It doesn't have anything to do with saving oppressed peoples. It has to do with spreading people around the world. And interestingly, it's only the Western world that gets to engage in this redistribution. Russia doesn't, China doesn't, Japan doesn't, none of the Arab states do. None of the African states would, if anybody wanted to resettle there. Most of them are trying to leave. Only Western Europe, the US, and Australia. What's the matter with that picture? You know, why is it everything rests on our shoulders? And there's another interesting aspect to that agenda. This program in 1976 also talked about the looming threat of overpopulation and how we all had to, you know, knuckle down and reduce our family size. And so, being good boys and girls that we are, we studiously paid attention and reduced our family sizes to the point where we're either barely at replacement rates or below replacement rates. Now, ironically, the lie came forth when the UN came out with their latest agenda, which is replacement population. So, at first they talked us into reducing our population, but now we find out, well, we actually need young people, we need people coming up to take the jobs that the retirees have left, and we don't have them. So, what's the next proposal? Replacement migration. Bring in populations from the third world to do those jobs that we don't have the people to do. Isn't that interesting? So they went from, because, believe me, none of the Muslim states, none of the African states, none of the Middle Eastern states, most of the rest of the world did not get the memo about population reduction. And they didn't seem to be worried about that either. So why is that? That was another target to the West. They're not trying to reduce Islamic population. They're not trying to reduce the population of people in Africa, except through things like banning DDT and stuff like that, which winds up getting a lot of people killed that don't have to be. It's all part of this bizarre agenda they have. So the program starts, well, first of all, it's important to note that it was written by Teddy Kennedy and Joe Biden. Teddy Kennedy also wrote the 1965 Immigration Act, and the purpose was to change the entire immigration program from populations around the world that wanted to and were capable of bringing in, adding something to our society, either mostly through their skills, to populations of needy third world individuals who would become reliable Democrat voters. That was Teddy Kennedy's goal, although he kept it very quiet. But among themselves, the left talk about this freely and openly, and they think nobody's reading. I read. That's what they say amongst themselves. And I can point you directly to the quotes if you want to see them. Another thing, okay, so the UN High Commissioner for Refugees chooses most of our refugees, oversees refugee processing centers, take the applications, send them to the State Department. The State Department selects the ones they want. U.S. resettlement contractors, who have misnamed voluntary agencies, they're not voluntary, VOLAGs for short, decide weekly where to put them in our communities. They rarely tell us where they're going to do that. They sneak them in, put them in, and the next day you wake up and you have neighbors you never knew you had. This is one of the biggest complaints, and I'm going to get into that in more detail later because that's part of their agenda, to be very secretive. U.S. accepts more refugees than all other resettlement countries combined. Don't let anybody tell you that we are not generous. We all know we're generous. My gosh, When things happen around the world, there's an earthquake, there's a tsunami, who shows up to help? The United States shows up with its money, shows up with its people, shows up with its military. We go right in and help people. Who else does that? Can anybody think of another country that so consistently? Israel. Thank you. Who else? Silence. Yeah. We are the most generous nation in the world. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That's just such baloney. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is the largest non-government organization in the world, next to the United States. Well, I mean, United Nations, I guess UN is a governmental organization, sort of. The second largest organization, has a lot of influence in the UN, 56 Islamic nations and Palestinian territories, and they heavily influence the UN High Commissioner for Refugees on who he selects. And again, he selects almost all our refugees because all the refugees we take are in UN High Commissioner for refugee camps. Now, well, anyway, there's too much to talk about, but these guys are real characters. The old one was a former Prime Minister of Portugal, and he talked about how much of an ardent supporter of refugee resettlement he was, and he thought it was really stupid of people to be worried about Syrian refugee resettlement and the prospect of ISIS coming in through the refugee flow. He thought we were all stupid to think that way, but at the same time, Portugal agreed to take a grand total of 23 Syrians in 2015. So Portugal must be really stupid, I don't know. This new guy wants to resettle 480,000 Syrians, and he doesn't specify where. Most of those are going to be targeted to the United States, and if Obama can get away with it, he's going to see how many he can bring. As it stands right now, we're slated for 10,000 in 2016 and another 30,000 in 2017, but he has already said he's going to try to get as many more as he can through alternate programs. But this is a brand new thing, this 480,000, it's brand new. It's starting to look like Europe, right?
Yep.
So, I always like to start with first principles. I talked about the resettlement agenda and how it was founded in 1976. It's a leftist agenda. The United Nations is a Marxist organization. The UN Charter was written by Alger Hiss, a Soviet agent who was working in the FDR administration, and he was tasked in 1947 to write the UN Charter. So the United Nations has always been seen by the Soviets and now the Russians as an instrument of their foreign policy, and that helps you understand why it's always been an organization hostile to the United States. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. Former radical David Horowitz said that. He was actually quoting another radical. And what they really mean is they don't care about the issues. The radical left, the people who come up with these issues, who come up with these agendas, they don't care about them. They see them merely as a vehicle for advancing and insinuating themselves into power. They wrap themselves in the mantle of compassion. It's tactical, because once they've done that, anybody who says anything against it suddenly has to be a heartless, racist, homophobe, xenophobe, Islamophobe, name your phobe. And it doesn't matter what the agenda is. All of the agendas have this same tactic involved, and as you all know, at this point, where you should know, no matter what happens, no matter who you are, no matter what the agenda is, if you oppose it, you're immediately called names. That's because you're not compassionate. They have stolen the moral higher ground. It's a tactic. It's a tactic. They don't mean it. Their goal only is to obtain power and wealth. And it's an age-old story. People have been trying to steel, power, and wealth since the dawn of time. It's nothing new. They've just dressed it up into new language and new agendas. Nothing new about it. Old as the Bible, old as the hills, old as humanity. And we can see from the results, refugee resettlement is perfect for that agenda. It dilutes our culture. That's the goal, to make us, the voting citizens who understand what America is about, irrelevant. As Ann Corcoran says, changing the country by changing its people. It sucks up welfare resources, and I get into that, a big deal later. Creates all kinds of division. It's a divide and conquer strategy by choosing all of these various agendas that are really objectionable to most people, like, for example, the transgender bathroom issue, right? Does that not polarize people? And when you get a huge population of illegal aliens or refugees or whoever from the third world coming in, taking an inordinate amount of resources and being given special privileges that we don't get, just naturally angers everybody. It's unfair, it's unjust, it's not right. That's the deal. Divide and conquer. Turn us against each other. Turn our society into smaller and smaller warring fragments until our whole society falls apart. It's a crisis strategy. And as Rahm Emanuel said, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. That's what it's about. And it makes the entire population, by destroying our economy, it makes the entire population increasingly reliant on government, and it facilitates something that Blair is going to talk about in great detail: civilization, jihad, the hijra, and Islamic terrorism. So we're being treated to a wall of misinformation. First of all, we're not resettling anybody that's going to Europe, okay? We get all these horrifying pictures of people dying, of people massing across borders by the tens of hundreds of thousands, and they're heartrending. We're not resettling a single one of those people. None of them have applied for refugee status with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. None of them have been selected by the United States for resettlement here. So, as heartrending as their stories may be, and some of them are, they're irrelevant to us. We are not resettling them, and we're not going to resettle them. And, additionally, most of them aren't refugees. The UN Director General says they're economic migrants. Most of them are not from Syria. They're from all over Africa, the Middle East, and as far away as Afghanistan. They're taking advantage of this refugee flow to get the generous welfare benefits in Europe, to get jobs in Europe, and I think for a lot more nefarious purposes as well. In fact, I believe this is a spearhead of a military maneuver, really. I believe that. But there's even more information. So, okay, the people we are going to resettle are the Syrians in the refugee camps in Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. 4 million of them there. It takes almost 2 years for the application to go through. None of those people are running anywhere. So the minute you see these pictures of people fleeing war and all that stuff, it's all phony. They fled a couple of years ago, and now they're safely ensconced in refugee camps. There's no doubt that they could use some help there. And in fact, we can help 12 refugees there for every refugee we resettle here. 12 times the bang for the buck, which is more compassionate. And that's true especially when you consider that most of these people just want to go home. They don't want to be transplanted to a place they've never been. They don't know the language. They don't know the culture. They don't know anything about it. They say, we just want to go home. And in fact, that's the goal of refugee resettlement. Ultimately, it's supposed to be to send people back to where they came from. Okay? So we are blowing the whole thing out of the water. resettlement is the last resort. But it gets worse than that. Most of them aren't refugees by our definition. This is the definition taken directly from the 1951 Protocol on Refugees and the 1969 or 67, I forget, additional protocols, you know. It's a fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, etc. However, individuals fleeing natural disasters and generalized violence who have crossed an international border are not considered refugees. And the reason is there's 60 million of them. Most of the resettlement contractors are just drooling over the thought of having our refugee definition expanded to include those people, because they get paid by the head about $5,000 to resettle refugees. So they love the idea that there's 60 million refugees out there, or quote-unquote refugees out there, that they think they should be able to resettle. And the fact of the matter is most of them don't meet the definition, because if they did, we'd basically have to open up the whole world to resettlement in the U.S. But guess what? That's their agenda. So they're all for it. And it gets even worse than that. So since 2012, we have resettled about 5,000 Syrians into the United States. 47 of them are Christian. Who are the ones in Syria and Iraq getting beheaded? Christians. They're the Christians, they're the Yazidis, they're the other minorities. Right? Yeah. These are the refugees, and we are not resettling them. They are afraid to go into the refugee camps because they're treated just as badly there. Yep. So they won't go. So they're really in a tough spot. And now they're confronted with a nation which should be giving them first priority, putting them at the bottom of the list. Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah. Now he is getting people in from other programs: asylum, temporary protected status, humanitarian parole, the visa waiver program, student visas, and other non-immigrant programs. And we now have over 100,000 Syrians since 2012 already. So why do we have this massive resettlement program even going? We've already met more than our quota. We've already done that. Well, the reason is because most of them came in on their own power. The refugee resettlement industry did not get to resettle them. They did not get to get their huge government contracts to do so. And here's just a snapshot of how the immigration program is expanding and has expanded. And these are sort of what are generally considered to fall under the refugee, they're not in the refugee program, that is the first column there, but they are generally considered to be a class of refugees. We have special immigrant visas. Those are people who actually helped us in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those are people who really deserve to be resettled because they helped us and they faced death there. Except that program is now being abused also. Cuban Haitian entrant program, no more boat people, they're just coming in freely. And you think Castro is good with that? Well, only if they're people that he selects. Asylum seekers, about 25,000 a year. There's also something called Follow to Join, which is families of asylum seekers. Trafficking victims, that's another, in my mind, legitimate refugee program. But as you see, it's tiny, so it doesn't get a lot of attention. And then we have the unaccompanied alien minors. What's missing there is their families that they were accompanied by. Most people don't know that. But in 2014, for example, there were not 57,000, there were 65,000 and another 65,000 families, so that's really 130,000 people that came in through that program that 1 year alone. And supposedly we're going to surpass that this year. Okay? And this is only part of it. In the refugee program, the refugees get here and then they can immediately fill out applications to bring family members. And the Somalis abused that so extensively that they had to discontinue it for Somalis. They were able to identify 20,000 Somalis that came in here claiming to be relatives of first-time refugees who weren't related to them at all. Those are the ones they found. And no doubt that goes on to this day. The visa waiver program is extremely dangerous. We allow people in from 38 countries, mostly Western Europe. They don't have to apply for a visa. All they need to do is show their passport at the door, and they can come right in. Trouble is that ISIS has a passport printing facility now. A counterfeit passport manufacturing facility. We let in 20 million people in the visa waiver program in 2014 alone. In 2015, we had over 150,000 visa overstays in that program. Who were those people? Where did they go? I believe that ISIS has already taken advantage of this and is here. It would be surprising if they weren't, wouldn't it?
Yes.
The entire immigration program is out of control. We allow over 1 million legal permanent residents a year in the U.S. 1 million per year. Only 15% come in here to work. The rest are family reunification and other programs. Those are just the immigrants. Then there's the non-immigrant visas for students and other vacation travelers, many of whom overstay their visas. It's out of control. There are so many categories of immigrant, I couldn't even begin to describe it. It would take a whole hour to go through all the various categories. It's depressed American wages by about $100 billion a year. And when you count all of the immigrant and non-immigrant programs together, we are now bringing in 250,000 Muslims every year. And there's a kind of a snapshot of legal and illegal immigration in recent years, and as you can see, from 2010 forward, just skyrocketing. And those are the ones we catch. I think we're getting a lot more illegal aliens coming across the border than we catch. So here's sort of a snapshot of the resettlement program. Department of Homeland Security, that's the vetting process. State Department, they do whatever they do, $500 million. And then the Office of Refugee Resettlement, about $2 billion now. That includes the unaccompanied alien minors, who they are now trying to redefine as refugees. They are not, under any circumstances, they are economic migrants, but that doesn't stop Obama's phone and pen. If he wants to change the program, he does so extra legally, without even thinking about it. These are the VOLAGs. These are 2014 numbers. These are the numbers that they got in that year alone from refugee resettlement. Catholic Charities, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, biggest one, $500 million in 2014 alone. Gives you a window into why so many religious organizations are just thrilled about refugee resettlement. They make a lot of money from it. At least these umbrella organizations identified with various religions do. But all the people that run these things, they're radical leftists. You read the things they say publicly. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is embarrassed by that name, so now they use the acronym HIAS. Its leader, a Jewish man himself, says that Hebrew is elitist and outdated, so they don't want to use that name anymore. They are allied with J Street, which is a pro-Palestinian Jewish astroturf organization funded by George Soros. That's the kind of people we're talking about here. They are religious in name only. Rhinos, hey, how do you like that? And then we have Baptist Child and Family Services and Southwest Key, they're the two biggest unaccompanied alien children resettlement contractors, almost $300 million for BCFS. And Southwest Key, closely aligned with National Council of La Raza, almost $183 million. And you got to remember, these people make money. These people support the hard left's agenda. We're funding that through these programs. There's 9 contractors, there's 350 subcontractors who are the ones actually doing the resettling. And then there are thousands of teeny private nonprofits that feed off a litany of special programs available through grants from the Office of Refugee Resettlement to refugees. And all these people, every one of them, has a D next to their name. They are all supporting this agenda, and this helps you understand why it is such a big agenda, why it is so powerful, and why there's so many people that adamantly support it, despite all evidence to the contrary. This is what they are required to tell refugees that they will provide them. This is in the law. Affordable housing, furnishings, food, clothing, pocket money. They applied for all their welfare programs for them. That's one of the first things they do, get them on welfare so that they're quote-unquote self-sufficient on our tax dollars. Assistance with health screenings, registering kids in school, job interviews. They fill out the job applications. They basically got a free ride. I kind of want to go to Syria and become a refugee so I can come back and get all this stuff. I can probably be making more money than I am now. But they have a funny definition of self-sufficiency. This, again, is from the regulations. Refugees are still economically self-sufficient as long as they don't receive cash assistance. They can get Medicaid, they can get housing subsidies, they can get food stamps, they can get any number of WIC, all of the various programs. They just can't get TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is a primary cash welfare benefit. They can also get supplemental security income. How do you like that? This is a picture of refugee welfare use. Cash assistance, Muslims are the worst. All refugees are pretty bad, though, compared to the U.S. rate. And you look at that 15.1% utilization rate among our U.S. population for food stamps. That's twice as large as it has ever been in the history of the program. We have 46 million people on food stamps in the U.S. The last record was in the 20 millions. That's all happened since Obama took office. Yes, sir. I got it.
11/11, right?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm supposed to be on the radio at 11/11 every week. Thank you. So, this is more important. 2014 welfare use. Now, this is an interesting chart. It comes directly from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. I'm not making these statistics up. They gave them to me. It comes right out of a report. 2014 report to Congress, the latest one. So the 2009 cohort, people who have been here for 5 years, in 2014, we're still collecting, 44% of them were still collecting Medicaid, 17% were still collecting TANF, almost 30% were collecting SSI, 60% were on food stamps, and that 1.2% for public housing is wrong. It's more like 20%. Somebody at ORR screwed up with that one. But the interesting thing is, so here we have the latest crop of refugees. Their rate of use is higher than the ones 5 years old, but the ones who have been here for 5 years are still using it at substantial rates. And this is the most interesting thing that I find. TAMP, which is our main cash welfare program, in the first year they use it a lot, and then it goes down and goes down and goes down. But supplemental security income, which relatively fewer of them are using in the first year, goes up, goes up, goes up, and goes up. So what do you think's happening there? it looks like they're just replacing TANF, which defines them as not economically self-sufficient, with supplemental security income, with which they can still be defined as economically self-sufficient. There may be other things going on there. There's too much stuff to dig into, but that's an interesting thing to reflect on. And here's my favorite one. Refugees take jobs that Americans won't. Well, you know, our welfare benefits are so generous that in Michigan, if somebody, an unemployed person, takes all the welfare they're entitled to, they can earn the equivalent of almost $14 an hour or almost $20,000 a year. Why work? Right? If you can get all those benefits, why work? Why work for less than 15? Heck, why work for less than 20 bucks? I'd rather sit on my butt and watch television all day for 15 bucks an hour than work for 16, right? So we have a real problem with our excessively generous welfare program. So what happens is the Chamber of Commerce and one of its member companies, manufacturing companies, says, oh wow, we can bring in refugees and pay them $7.25 an hour, $7.50 an hour. The 2014 average was $9.59 according to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Low wages, right? Well, guess what? They get all the benefits American citizens do. So if they're only earning $15,000 a year, they're still qualified for another $17,000 a year in welfare benefits. So what's really happening here? We're just subsidizing manufacturing wages. That's all that's happening. This is crony capitalism. It's very well hidden. We're the ones left holding the bag. And what is improved? The people who are Americans who are unemployed are still unemployed. We're still paying their welfare. And now we're adding to that the burden of refugee welfare, which, as we have seen, is extremely high. Also a few manufacturers can fill their assembly lines with low-wage labor. And that's what attracts Republicans about it.
Yeah.
I'll give them credit. I'll say they're ignorant and they haven't gone through this little routine and figured this all out yet, although I suspect they probably know better.
I think so.
But that's the deal. That's the deal. It's not an improvement. What would be an improvement? Well, how about reforming welfare? How about reducing, making work for welfare? So, wait a minute. Didn't we do that? Oh yeah, that's right. We did it in 1996. And it was going real well, actually, for a while. Tommy Thompson, actually,
That's right.
I think he might have even been the inspiration for that bill. In any event, he did a lot, showed how it could work here. Well, Obama, with his phone and his pen, he fixed all that.
Yeah.
He went in and rewrote those regulations and essentially undermined that entire reform. Illegally. I mean, let's face it, this is just criminal activity. It is illegal. He is working way beyond his constitutional authority by doing these things.
Right.
But nobody's stopping him. And you have to ask the politicians themselves why that is true. I don't know. So that cohort, that 2009-2014 cohort, this is my approximation of what they cost on an annual basis, $4 billion a year. Now, if you go back to the refugees from earlier years, add that up, you see that it winds up actually being a whole heck of a lot more than that. That's just for that 5-year cohort, 400,000 people. We have brought in, I don't know how many millions of people through the refugee program, but a lot. At about $10,000 per refugee. We are paying for that. There's also innumerable refugee problems. Talk about school budgets. When you have 40 different languages spoken in the public schools, how do you manage that? When you have 82 different languages spoken in Manchester, New Hampshire public schools, how do you manage that? How do you hire people who can do that? They have some translation programs that they now use. But this is expensive. The ESL budget in Lewiston, Maine has gone up 4,000% since the year 2000. It was about $60,000, there were a couple of dozen in the year 2000. Now it's 25% of the student body, $3 million a year. And they just got 300 more this year. Amarillo, Texas, 911 calls in 36 languages. How do you deal with that? $1,300 per student per month ESL tutoring costs. Goes on and on. Health issues, refugees come to the United States carrying latent TB at extremely high rates, 20 to 49% in general. All these are statistics from state medical programs. I'm not making this up. I'm going to all the references for these things. 2 cases of active TB in Akron last year and this year at one high school alone. 11 cases in Florida in 2013. How many cases before that throughout the entire nation? 2, 3? They lifted the ban on HIV immigrants in 2010. Brings in about 4,200 a year at a 25-year cost of $17.6 billion, according to the CDC, which I think lowballs it. And then here's the latest one. The sandflies in Iraq and Syria are vicious. And because so many people have been herded into camps by ISIS, the problems with those sandflies and the parasites they carry have been multiplied. And this is the result. They get cutaneous leishmaniasis, which has this effect, that effect, and even affects animals. And those people are now coming into the refugee camps in Syria. But here's the attitude of a resettlement contractor. I was in Vermont last week, tried to help the citizens of Rutland fight against a brand new proposed resettlement of 100 Syrians there. That's just going to be the beginning. They will get at least 100 or more every year from now to the foreseeable future, and this person was primarily responsible for it. She stressed to the mayor, who took it upon himself without telling any of the 10 aldermen that he serves with that he was planning on doing this. He got the president of the aldermen involved, and nobody else, kept it completely on the QT, and she advised him, secrecy. We have all the emails. Secrecy, I can't stress how important it is to keep this thing secret. And she said, you gradually increase your circle of those in the know. That's what the words use. And the circle of influence of those in the know were people who were going to benefit, like landlords and potential vendors who would provide services to the refugees. And they all know it's completely reliable money because why? We're paying for it. Coming from the government. The refugees don't even have to think about it. They don't even have to apply. That's being done for them by the VOLACs. So, when they had got all their ducks lined up in a row and all their help, all their supporters, he announced it to the public at the end of April. He had been planning it since November. The whole town went nuts. I went up there and gave this speech to them, and they went even more nuts. It was fun. But, and then the next night, they had an aldermanic meeting where this woman and her supervisor from the U.S. Committee of Refugees and Immigrants came up to try to explain themselves, and they just got lambasted. But they're still going through it. This is what she said in public to a local ABC News interview. You know, you're going to offend some people. You're not going to be able to please everybody. No matter what you do, you're always going to offend someone, so we just made the decision ourselves. And one of the folks in the aldermanic meeting said, you know, let me give you a lesson in the U.S. Constitution. You are not the government. We are the government, and we're the ones that decide these things, not you. And she didn't say it. This is another great quote from Larry Bartlett, who is the Director of Refugee Admissions for the State Department, at a Twin Falls, Idaho citizens forum that people like us who oppose this program try to put together. He'd say, we would not bring refugees to any city in the United States. It wasn't going to be safe for the refugee to come to. The person had asked him, we're worried about Syrian refugees. We're afraid of terrorism. What's your answer? He said, well, I don't care about you. All I care about, I wouldn't take them to a place where I felt the refugee himself was going to be unsafe. So what's he saying? He's just repeating that narrative. They're all a bunch of racist Islamophobes, and they have more to fear from us than we have to fear from them. I don't know if I could have controlled myself if I had been in that audience. Really, this is a guy who makes money from us. We are his boss. He doesn't think so. So, I really do have to go. This is what we're looking at. We had to get, the guys at Secure Michigan had to do a FOIA to get this information on the proposed resettlement for this year for the state. This was not public information. And they excluded another 5,000 who were going to Detroit, and then we don't even know how many are planned to come to this Syrian village they're planning for Pontiac. So they're still secretive, even after a FOIA. And same thing in 2015. This is another result of a FOIA. Syria resettled 180 people in these counties in 2015. Although you couldn't find that out by querying the database, which is very public, they had to get a FOIA to do that. So there's a lot of stuff going on to fight this, and I will talk about that much more this afternoon in our workshop. But we are trying to do everything we can, as long, however, as we have a government that is so insistent on pushing this agenda. We're going to have a really tough time with it, because the law was written specifically by Teddy Kennedy to be very ambiguous and to be very much heavily favoring the federal government. It was very difficult to fight. But there are a lot of proposals out there. We've had a hand in helping them craft some of them. And hopefully we get new leadership that is really interested in the future of our country. After 2016, we'll be able to put some of this stuff through. Thanks a lot for having me.